I've got 7 o'clock, and I'm afraid I may not have enough time tonight. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I've asked if someone would lead us in a prayer, and as soon as we have a prayer, we'll go ahead and get started.
Would you pray with us, please? Father God, we're so blessed that you loved us enough to create us, to provide us with everything that we need, to give us a world and a universe and a cosmos that is so elegant and so beautiful. Father, all we have to do is just look around and understand the beauty that you wanted to provide for us. Thank you for allowing us to be Christians, to be your children. Thank you for Jesus. Father, we thank you for teachers. Thank you for John. Thank you for those that work to help us understand your will and your way and the ways that you want to provide and care for us and love us. Help us to open our hearts and our minds as we take our study tonight. And to thank and again appreciate you more and more with every fact that we learn. In Jesus' name, amen.
So I've been working on a presentation all day today for my job. So if I start talking about fish or something, you'll know why. But I have to give a pretty lengthy presentation next week. So I've been working on that all day today. More than likely what might happen is I might lose my place and my train of thought might go, and I might take a minute to figure it out and think of where I was. So we've been talking about the origins of the universe. We're going to continue along with that just a little bit and discussing the age of the earth. Why would we even talk about how old the earth is in a church setting?
I think it goes for probably a lot of us. It has to do with our just simply our faith in God.
Okay.
Because we have, if we're going to believe the words of this book, we go day 1, day 2, day 3. I think that has a lot to do with it. But also, it probably helps us to understand our faith a little bit more.
Okay. I agree. Like I said at the very beginning, we're never going to prove God exists. We're not going to prove any of this. We're just going to look at evidence. But God doesn't expect us to have blind faith. Jesus didn't just come to earth and say, trust me, I'm the Son of God. He showed evidence, and he told his apostles, to take the knowledge you have. And all we're doing is looking at evidence. The difference is we're looking at evidence that you're not particularly shown. Because a lot of the research that is done, the people doing the research already have a preconceived idea of what they believe. And if the results don't match up with what they believe, then it must be a mistake. We'll throw it out. We'll do it again until we get the results we expect. So there's a show on Netflix. I don't know if any of you have seen it, about flat Earth and flat earthers. And it's interesting, but it's also kind of funny because they spent several $1,000s. They're going to do 2 experiments to prove that the earth is flat. And while they're setting it all up, they're saying, so when we look at the results, if the earth is flat, these are the results we'll get. But if it's round, then these are the results we'll get. So let's take a look at the results. And they go, we must have made a mistake because they had the exact results that said the earth is round. And they said, we've made a mistake here. We'll have to figure this out. We'll have to go back and look at it. Then they did another experiment where they shot a laser beam over several miles. And if the earth is curved, then it should be elevated on this platform by X many feet. Guess what the results showed? It was elevated to the exact calculation that a curved earth said it should be. So it's funny, but at the same time, they're not going to change their paradigm because they believe what they want to believe. And, part of science, statistical analysis is a big part of it. And I hate statistics. I call it sadistics. But you have preconceived ideas, and it's kind of a joke in statistics, but there is a statistical test called a whip test. And the joke is that if your data doesn't say what you want it to say, whip it till it confesses. And you can take data and manipulate it in such a way to get the results that you really want to get. So when I was in high school, college, I didn't think much about how old the earth was. You know, the Bible said God created the earth in 6 days, and that was enough for me. I didn't care how long ago it was. I didn't really understand the genealogies when at that time when I was probably a freshman in high school, never really paid much attention to it. I know people lived for a long time. When I started getting really interested in science and biology, and then I went into college, and you start hearing all the theories and all of the different, you start studying the Bible more and you start getting the genealogies, you realize this doesn't all fit. I struggled with that. And I struggled with how do you get the biblical timeline to fit the scientific timeline? And then I hear things about, day-age theory. Each day is an age. Or gap theory. There's huge amounts of time between each creation day. Well, that makes sense. It fits. I didn't really pay much attention to it. And, I was in high school in the 80s, graduated college in the early 90s, and you think, well, science has been around for a long time. The Big Bang Theory was not postulated until 1922. Prior to 1922, people thought everything had already been there or God created the heavens and the earth. That was really it. So it's fairly new science, and there really wasn't much done about it until the 1940s. So 1944, they did some research, and Big Bang Theory became a little bit more prominent, and they predicted that if the Big Bang Theory were true, then we should find this thing called cosmological background radiation. And they finally discovered that. Doesn't mean it is true, it's just if it is true, we should find this. They finally discovered that in about 1963. And so far, that's the only thing that has been proven or found that actually fits with the Big Bang Theory. Everything else is assumption and theoretical physics, but only the radiological background is the only thing that says that, okay, it might be true. So that was in the mid-60s. Well, creation science didn't really get started till the mid-60s either, because they start, people that believe in creation, that believe in the Bible, start saying, hey, this theory is taking off, so we really need to research this a little bit more, so they start having creation science. And there are a lot of geologists, biologists, physicists, cosmologists that believe in God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and they have scientific evidence, they have published papers. A lot of their papers are not accepted in mainstream science because it doesn't fit with the paradigm of, no, the earth is 4.5 billion years old, so your results must be wrong. Because it doesn't fit with what they believe. So when I started looking at that stuff, it was probably more in the late 90s, early 2000s that I really started looking at it and seeing like, there actually is scientific evidence to support young Earth. It's not all this other stuff that you hear. I'm not saying that's not evidence either, but we have this other evidence, and you just don't hear about it though. And however God did it, I don't know. I have faith that God did it. If he did something with day-age theory or something like gap theory, he's God. He can do what he wants. I believe the evidence will show us that the earth is young. Not everybody is going to believe that. And, honestly, that's probably okay. I will say that the Big Bang Theory does not line up biblically with creation, because the Big Bang Theory tells us that there was this huge thing. Okay, God said, let there be light. Those two things can match up. But then, according to the Big Bang Theory, there were hundreds of millions of years of darkness. And then slowly, when the Big Bang happened, the only thing that could have possibly been produced is hydrogen, helium, and lithium, the three lightest elements. Big Bang Theory scientists will tell you that's it. Hydrogen, helium, and lithium, they're the only things that were created. And over hundreds of millions of years, they started to use gravity to pull together until they were so dense that they ignited and became stars. So Big Bang Theory tells us that first there was maybe light, then there were stars. Creation tells us that there was light, and stars didn't come along till like day 4. So, and then after these stars burned for long periods of time, they had nuclear fission that was going on inside the stars that created all the other elements on the periodic chart. And when they went supernova, they just blew up and threw all that other stuff all over the place, which eventually formed around our sun and created the Earth. But the Earth was created on day 3, and the sun was created later, according to the Bible. So, also, Big Bang Theory tells us that the Earth was created from molten lava that eventually cooled down. The Bible tells us it was created from water, because God separated the waters and dry ground appeared. So I will say the Big Bang Theory does not line up biblically. Timeline, I don't know how God did it. I don't know if he took millions of years to do it. I don't believe he did. I believe he did it in a much shorter time frame. But anyways, I just wanted to, say that, I struggled with it myself, and I know that other people struggle with it, trying to get the scientific timeline to fit the biblical timeline. But at the same time, how do you reanimate dead flesh? Can anyone explain how to do it? Because God did it multiple times. He did it with Jesus. He did it with Jairus' daughter. He did it with Lazarus. He did it with the widow's son in the street, with Tabitha. We don't understand it, but we don't have a problem believing that. But we struggle to believe that God could have done this in 6,000 years. So why can we believe one thing easily but not the other? Because there is no physical evidence that says you can reanimate flesh. But the Bible tells us it happened. And if we didn't believe it happened, I don't think any of us would be here tonight. So, anyways, I'll put the soapbox away. And so, just how old is the Earth? We talked a little bit about it. Evolutionary theory, Big Bang Theory says that the Earth was formed 4.5 to 4.6 billion years ago. I like to see things visually to see how many zeros there are there. And the thing about the age of the Earth is also, it's about evolution. Because any scientist will tell you that if the Earth is not billions of years old, evolution's impossible. And if evolution's impossible, then how'd we get here? And the only other answer is God created the heavens and the earth, and he created us. But if you don't believe in God, you've got to have a theory that explains how you got here. So, the thing is that if most scientists believe this, then what does it mean about how things were? And I have a copy of a paper, so if some of y'all want to see it later, and it's the real reason that 99% of scientists believe in evolution instead of creation. And I've talked about it before. It's because 99% of the universities out there teach only evolution. They don't give you any other alternative. 1% of the universities may teach evolution, but they'll also teach creation. So you have the option to determine for yourself based on the evidence you're presented. But 99% of the universities only present one side of the story. Now, the biblical account suggests that the earth is somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. And that creation occurred around 4004 BC. I'm real specific there, but it's give or take 50 years. And this, if I made this in 2014, I have adjusted it. So, but We don't have PowerPoint back there, so I can't fix it. But if we calculate back, with today's 2025, if creation was 4004 BC, then we get that the earth is about 6029 years old. So one thing, like I said, creationists and evolutionists both believe that if the earth is only 6,000 years old, then evolution is not possible. So an ancient earth is critical if you don't believe in God. It's the only explanation for how we got here. So the only other option is an intelligent designer. And for the next little bit, we're only going to talk about some scientific theory. If we get through it fast enough, I'll get back to some biblical stuff, but I kind of have to lay a foundation. So we've talked a little bit about this before, but what are all these layers that we see at Grand Canyon and Palo Duro Canyon, what are they supposed to represent? Yeah, long geological time period. It's believed that all of these individual layers were laid down, sedimentation and stuff that laid down over millions of years, and that each layer represents a really lengthy period of time. So the old Earth idea is that each layer represents millions of years of deposited soil that eventually get compressed into rock. And within those layers of rock, you have fossil specimens. So those organisms are believed to have died during that particular geologic time. Since the rock is aged to a certain age, then you assume that the organisms that are within that time period must be that age as well. So if we have, here is, say, 50 million years ago, and here is 40 million years ago, any fossils we find in that time period must be between 40 and 50 million years old. So that's when the animals live. That is called relative dating. That is when you have aged out the rock and you figure that the organisms are the same age because they are relative to the position. So we call it relative dating. So the major argument for the Earth being old is based on what we call uniformitarian dating. And it is a technique where you age rock layers. During the technique, this is where you've heard the term radiometric dating, where they'll say they've done radiometric dating as something is million years old. So we're going to have a quick little chemistry lesson because I am not a chemist. But everything is made, you have protons, electrons, and neutrons. This is an atom, one atom of helium. It is helium because it has one positive proton, a neutral neutron, circled by a negative electron. This is helium because it has two of everything. Protons and neutrons and electrons are the exact same. If I was to take one of these of each and stick it over here, then this now becomes helium. This is not helium electrons or hydrogen electrons and helium electrons. Electrons are just electrons. And based on how many of them you have determines what the element is. So sometimes in nature, these get a little bit unbalanced, and you might, you notice that you have 2 electrons, 2 protons, 2 neutrons. Nice and balanced. Everything is even. But if you pick up an extra electron, now it's unbalanced. Nature does not like to be unbalanced, ever. So it tries to rebalance. And the way that it does that is it's going to try and throw that electron off, and that's radiation. So anytime we get something that's radioactive, it's because it's decaying and it's just throwing off neutrons and protons and electrons, and it makes it radioactive. So we have certain unbalanced elements, and we call them isotopes. Isotopes don't like to be unbalanced. So they will throw off electrons and grab neutrons and protons to try and balance out. And when they do, that's called radioactive decay. So you have a radioactive, and Buck can probably tell us a lot more about this than I can, but you have a nuclear power plant and you have nuclear material in there. That stuff is unbalanced and it's just throwing off electrons, and that's what's producing the energy to make nuclear power. So you can measure this rate of decay, and some elements decay super fast, split second. Some of them take a really long time to decay. So when we look at how it decays, we're able to determine how much starting product, how much end product, and you measure the differences and you say, okay, well, I know that this element decays this fast, and I have this percentage of starting and this percentage of ending, so the rock must be this old. Does that make sense? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, so this radiometric dating is based on assumptions. Are assumptions always true? No. One of them is that this rate of decay is constant. Your watch is constant. It goes tick, tick, tick. It keeps the same time constantly over and over and over. And radioactive decay is supposed to be the same thing. It's supposed to be a constant rate. It happens at a specific rate that you can measure. The other assumption is that the rock that's being analyzed is not contaminated by excess ending product. We're measuring ratios of starting and ending product, but what if a little bit of extra ending product seeped in there and made it higher level? The third assumption is that the rock has no excess start. The three assumptions are: one, that it has no excess starting product; one, it has no excess ending product. So you get leaching of certain starting and ending products in and out of the rock. And we know this happens. So looking at that first assumption, radioactive element decay is a constant rate. If your watch randomly sometimes goes fast, sometimes goes slow, and sometimes runs at a normal time, what time is it? You have no idea, because you don't know how often or how long your watch ran fast, how often or how long it ran slow, and how often and how long it ran normal. We have all, especially those of us that used to have wind-up watches, they slow down over time, right? And every couple of days you got to set them forward a little bit because they don't keep constant time accurately. So if things are slowing down and speeding up, then your watch is not accurate. Researchers at Purdue discovered that the decay rates of certain isotopes were faster in the winter than in the summer. So it's not constant. We know the assumption is false. We know that temperature can speed up and slow this rate of radioactive decay down. Now, the researchers think, nope, that doesn't fit my paradigm. I have always been taught that the rate of radioactive decay is constant, so I messed up. So they reran the experiment. And in 2006, they found out again that besides temperature, it's also affected by solar flare activity. Based on the strength and number of solar flares, will also speed up and slow down radioactive decay. And some recent research and theories have been coming out that they think this rate of radioactive decay has actually been slowing down over time. So it used to be a lot faster thousands of years ago than it is today. So that tells us, we already know one of the assumptions is wrong. So the second assumption, the rock crystal being analyzed is not contaminated by infusion of excess end product. Leaching of parent elements out of the rock sample did not occur. We know it does. In fact, I read a paper this past week that says when geologists are aging rocks, they must consider the amount of product that has leached in and out and make adjustments accordingly. How do they know how much has leached in or out? They're assuming, based on their idea of this is a rock, it should be this old, so I'm going to make my adjustments accordingly. And that's what they're doing. The other assumption is that since the earth formed, this is a new one, since the earth formed as part of the universe, then we can age meteorites and moon because they're the same age. So, the Big Bang Theory is telling us that since the moon and earth were formed at the same time, then they must be the same age, because all of that stardust from the exploding supernova stars entered our solar system at the same time, and so they were created at the same time. Well, we have lots of interstellar I won't say lots. We've had 3 interstellar objects in my lifetime that have come from outside our solar system and passed through. So we can't sample those. We have no idea what the age of those are. We can only assume that they think they must be older, but we have no way, we've never been able to capture any of those and sample them. Right now we have the spaceship that's approaching Earth because a Harvard scientist said this interstellar object might be a spaceship, so everybody's jumping on that bandwagon. But we've had objects from other solar systems come through, but we don't know if they're the same age or not. Now, so let's see. We use mathematical models a lot. There is a lot of information that we can't really process because it takes a long time to look at it and nobody's going to be around long enough to study it. So we use mathematical models a lot to see what things are going to be like in 10 years, 20 years, 40 years from now, 100 years from now. Well, one of the mathematical models they use looks at ratios of lead isotopes. This is considered to be much more accurate than radiometric dating, because we already saw that radiometric dating has 3 assumptions, and those 3 assumptions are flawed. We already know they're false, so we know there's problems with radiometric dating. But this is based on how much lead there was when the planets formed. How do you even guess how much lead there was when the universe was formed? We can't possibly know. You're trying to look back at what they assume is 4.5 billion years and say that, well, 4.5 billion years ago, there was this amount of lead in the universe. I just don't see that as being a possibility. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't see how that can be. But this assumption is also based on other assumptions. And when how many of us got in trouble as kids because we assumed things that our parents didn't think we would get in trouble for? And then sometimes we assumed that I assumed you knew where I was. Well, you assumed wrong. So we know assumptions don't always work out right. And, to me, I found this statement, like I said, this is believed to be the best evidence for an old Earth. And it's based on assumptions that we can never prove. I found this statement on an old Earth website, a website that promotes Big Bang Theory. It says, if the Earth, the Moon, and the meteorites were not related and of the same age, there would be no reason for their lead isotopic composition to be about the same. In other words, if all these things were not made from the same material at the same time, there would be no similarity between them. And I like to say that since God made them, the same designer, out of the same material in the same process in the same 6 days, then obviously they would all have the same ages. And if we look at day-age theory, then the earth was created long before the moon and the heavenly bodies. And if there is a huge amount of time between those creation days, then the moon rocks that our astronauts brought back should age out millions of years younger than the earth. And they don't. When they age them, they age out to be about the same age. But so to me, that says that day-age theory and gap theory just can't possibly be. So land was created on the third day, moon was created on the fourth day. So earth was the third day, moon was the fourth day, and if there's millions of years in between, then the ages shouldn't work out. But they work out to be the same age. So we know when certain rocks were created from volcanic eruptions. We know that Mount Etna in Sicily erupted in 122 BC, 2,147 years ago, but when they age the rock, it comes out to be between 170 and 330,000 years old. But we know how old it is, and it doesn't age outright. Mount Etna erupted again in 1972, 53 years old. It ages out between, nearly 250,000 years old. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1986. It's 39 years old, and it ages out between 300 and 400,000 years old, using radiometric dating. In Hawaii, volcano erupted from 1800 to 1801, 224 years old, it ages out to 1.4 to 1.7 million years. New Zealand, volcano is 71 years old, it ages to roughly 3.5 million years old. And we know that that rock is only 71 years old. And then in Hawaii, 1959, we know it's 66 years old, and it ages out, depending on which technique you use, as old as 15.3 million years. Because the idea is when the rock is superheated into liquid magma, all of the end product, which is gas, is driven off. When the rock rehardens, there is no end product in it, and you're simply waiting for, in this case, potassium-40 to degrade into argon-40. And that's supposed to take about 1.2 billion years, according to radiometric dating. So we know the assumptions are wrong. We have known dates of rock formation that come out with wrong dates. So we know that these assumptions don't fit. There are over 68 radiometric dating techniques. 23 of them say the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. None of them say the Earth is between 4 and 5 billion years old. So even if you say roughly half of them say the Earth is young, and the other half say over 1 million years, which one's right? I would say the one that you want it to be right. Because if you believe the Earth is old, then all these young Earth ones, they're just wrong. We messed up. There's a mistake. We'll do it again until we get the right answer. Maybe you got the right answer already. Now, biblically, the first question is, how do we get around 6,000 years old? I know a lot of you know the answer to that. But, we look at the genealogies in the Bible, and, here, we have an age range between 6,000 and 10,000 years. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about how we get that difference, a 4,000-year difference. But we know biblically that Adam was created on day 6. And if you look at the genealogies in Genesis chapter 5 and 11, we know that the time between Adam and Abraham was 2,000 years. And both biblical and secular scholars all agree that Abraham was a real man who lived around 2000 BC. Nobody disputes that. So Then if we add the first 2,000 years between Adam and Abraham to the 2,000 years between Abraham and 1 AD, we get 4,000 BC roughly as a creation date. And then if we take, I have 2014, but if we take 2025, add 4,000, we get 6,025 years. And that's where we come up with that. The reason that we have a difference between, say, somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years, and most people will narrow it down and say between 6,000 and 8,000 years, is what are we using to interpret it? So, the Masoretic text, which is where most English translations are based off of, it gives a date of creation around 4,000 BC. The Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Masoretic text, oftentimes you'll have a few discrepancies in age. And then we have some looking at certain discrepancies in the ages that it's very difficult to calculate genealogies and time periods. You have to look at multiple different Bible verses to get them right. But most scholars tend to believe that somewhere around 4,000 BC, give or take 50 years, is if we take our current date, backdate it to Abraham, and then look at the genealogies from Abraham back to Adam, we get somewhere around 4,000, 4004 BC is when creation would have occurred. And we'll remember that because when we talk about Noah's flood in a few days, I'll refer back to that. Now, besides these radiometric dating techniques not working, besides having the wrong ages when we have known rock formations, we have a lot of historical and cultural information also that supports a young Earth. So, if all people are descended from a common ancestry, would we not all have roughly the same story? See, how many of you have played the telephone game? So, when you started the message, was it identical when it got to the end? Now, if people play it right, when you get to the end, the message may be a little distorted. Some of the figures and details may not be quite the same, but maybe the same general idea is still there. Now, some people don't play it right, and they totally change the story as it goes, and it doesn't make sense anymore. But if we look at the Babylonian histories, they put creation around 6158 BC. India says 6147. Persia says 5507. Germany says 3993. Israel says 3760. Anglo-Saxon history says around 5200 BC. And there's more. This is just some of them. But these are historians who have studied these cultures and looked at their ancient records, and their ancient records put creation of the earth all roughly around that 4000 BC time frame. Now, they may have some dates a little bit off because we had oral history for a long time. And any of you that have ever been fishing know that your fish gets a little bit bigger every time you tell the story. And any time you tell a story and you get a good reaction, you tell it again, you add just a little more to it. You didn't really change it, you just made it better story. So it's not uncommon for oral histories to change a little bit. Now, they were really good with their oral histories because they knew how important it was to keep it straight. But a lot of these, you didn't have the first written language until around 3000 BC, which is after much of this, and it's also right around the time of the flood. So I think the flood actually was around 12 or 1600 BC. I'd have to look at my timeline again. I haven't looked at it in several years. But we have a lot of cultural and historical other countries and ethnicities that all have stories that put creation in that time frame of what the Bible says as well. Even the Mayans have a flood date of 3113. And we'll look at I have a timeline I've created that looks at the genealogies and the flood, and we'll look at that when we look at Noah's flood. But a lot of these dates do coincide really well. Now, some more scientific, or we'll say scientific, but it's really mathematical evidence. Again, this is 2014. Our current world population is 8,120,000,000. So we use, like I said, we use mathematical modeling all the time. We use it in census and population stuff. Schools are constantly wanting to know how many people are moving into the district, how many teachers do we need to prepare for in the upcoming year. Our government collects census data every 10 years. You can go online right now and predict what will the U.S. population be in 2100. And we have all of this mathematical modeling, and it's considered fairly accurate. So if we say that the earth is old, how long has modern man been on the earth? According to evolution, we are modern man, Homo sapien. Anybody have a guess? Old Earth science says that we, Homo sapien, modern man, has been on the earth for at least 1 million years, maybe 4 million. So if we use census mathematical modeling numbers and we use conservative numbers, we're going to say we've only been on earth for 1 million years, the shortest amount of time. And if we say that the average lifespan during that time is only 42 years old, it's a lot higher now. It used to be a lot less. So we're just going to say that the average lifespan was 42 years and only 2.4 children per family. My grandfather was one of 7. His father was one of 7. Huge families were very common long time ago. Today, we're probably only averaging about 1.8 per family. But we're going to use conservative numbers, say 2.4 children per family, average lifespan 42 years old, and we've only been on the earth for a minimum 1 million years. If you take into account wars, diseases, and other natural disasters that have happened, our current world population should be 1.1 times 10 to the 5,000th power. I like to see numbers. That should be our current world population. That is a 1 with 5,000 zeros after it. Our current world population is less than those yellow numbers up in the top corner. Now, our universe is 20 billion light years across, and it can only hold 1 times 10 to the 100th power. So, that's the yellow number. That's all our universe can hold. And I read an article the other day that said it even gave less numbers. It said that if every single individual was only 3 feet tall and you squeezed them together shoulder to shoulder, you could only fit 1 times 10 to the 87th power. So 87 zeros. You know, this is a huge number. I don't even know what this number would be. You know, we think we can't understand a $36 trillion national debt. Every time we add a zero, we're increasing by a factor of 10. And we're adding 4,900 zeros. Our universe cannot even hold this many people. But using conservative numbers, that's what our current population should be. And if it's not, where are all the dead bodies? Where are all the bones? Where are all the grave sites? Because there had to have been billions upon billions upon billions of people over those 1 to 4 million years. And what about all the animals? Because there would have been animals that would have been reproducing as well. You know, the earth should be overrun by animals and people. But if we look at a young earth, Let me get caught up here. We can do the same thing, go back 6,000 years, and we can use the very, very, very conservative numbers, and our population should only be about 4.4 billion. We're more than that, but I found a calculator today, and I put in our current population. I went back 5,000 years to account for the flood. I started with 8 people, and I punched in the numbers. And in order for us to have a current population, what we have now, our growth rate would be 0.41%. The current growth rate for the earth is 0.85%. So we would have no problem going back 4,000, 5,000 years, starting with 8 people and having the population that we currently have using conservative numbers. So this is mathematical modeling that supports a young Earth, 6,000 years of people being on the planet, and really 5,000 years of people being on the planet since the time of basically Noah's flood, between then and Tower of Babel. So, when we think about the Tower of Babel and everybody being sent off and all these other cultures that have the same basic creation history and have the same basic creation timeline. So there is evidence that supports a young Earth. There is mathematical evidence, there is scientific evidence, and there is historical and cultural evidence, but you are never taught that in school. Let's see. Let me do a little bit more, and then if y'all, I'm hoping there are questions. So if there are, then I'll stop and we'll take some questions. But more evidence for the young Earth, and I talked a little bit about that last time. Hydrogen in the universe. The theory with the Big Bang Theory is that when the Big Bang occurred, 75% of the universe was hydrogen and 25% of the universe was helium. Well, over 14 billion years and all these stars forming and all the nuclear fission that's gone on in the stars to create all the other elements that have been supernova blasted all over the universe to create the planets and everything, there should be far less hydrogen and far more helium in the world, in the universe, and there's not. Because if the Earth is billions of years old, hydrogen is the fuel that drives the universe and helium is the exhaust. And for us to have created all the carbon, all the gold, all the aluminum, all the other elements that created all the planets, all the stardust that created everything, there should have been far more hydrogen used up by now, which means there should be far more helium. But helium is really kind of rare. We had a helium shortage a few years ago here on Earth because, we fill a lot of party balloons with it. But there's not enough hydrogen in the universe to support a universe being 14 billion years old. And when you look at all of this, I'm not saying this is proof, but it is strong evidence. And it's evidence that you have to consider. And when you consider that evidence, you cannot just say, well, the Earth is old, because there's evidence that says otherwise. More evidence, we have what are called, let me see, I think I wrote down who might have said that. Sir Fred Hoyle, and he actually is the one that came up with the name, the Big Bang Theory, and he did it as a joke, but it stuck. But he's a British astronomer, and he said that the universe consists almost entirely of hydrogen. And he stated that since the universe was mostly full of hydrogen, then the possibility of an old universe is impossible. So we can see that the universe being what it is, the creation issue simply cannot be dodged. Here's someone who knows far more about cosmology and astrophysics than I do. And he's coming to the conclusions that I came to as well when I saw stuff. More evidence, we have what are called polystrata fossils. Anybody know what a polystrata fossil is?
It's not in the right layer.
Okay? So we have all these geologic layers that represent millions of years, but we have fossils that run through them all. This is a tree. Now, go home and bury the bottom foot of your tree and see how long it lives. It won't live very long if you mound up a foot of dirt around the base of your tree. It's going to die. Well, if this foot-thick layer, how did that tree survive for millions of more years to be slowly buried over time? It can't. But oftentimes what happens with trees in a flood is the root mass is still attached. It gets really heavy. It's full of dirt and rocks, and it gets a lot of water in it, and the tree will stand itself up, and when it gets waterlogged, it'll sink. And then you get rapid burial. I'm hoping it'll work, but I've taken where you take a scoop of dirt and put it in a jar and shake it up and set it aside, and over time you see layers begin to settle out based on the heavier materials at the bottom and the lighter materials at the top, which is exactly what we see in the strata. You know, floods are destructive. And if you destroy and churn up all of this material, and then the tree settles naturally like they do, and then all the sediments come down during a global worldwide flood, you're going to get those layers that are going to line up, rapidly burying the tree, allowing it to fossilize over time. And we'll talk later about how long does it really take to create a fossil. Because there are fossils that have stuff from the 1800s inside of it. So it apparently only takes a few hundred years. So polystrata fossils like this are evidence of a global catastrophic flood event. And we find them all over the world, not just in particular places, because a lot of scientists will tell you, like, yeah, it was a catastrophic event, but it was just local. It was either a local volcano or a local flood, but we find them all over the world. Actually, we might finish up. I'm almost done. So I have a couple Bible verses I want to read first. I took, one of them is 2 Peter 3:5. And what it says, before I read, I'm going to read a bunch of quotes by a bunch of astrophysicists and cosmologists and people that started their careers as atheists and converted themselves based on what they saw. And 2 Peter 3 verse 5 says, "But they deliberately forget that long ago by God's words the heavens came into being and the earth was formed out of water and by water." So people forget. You know, and again, Big Bang Theory says the earth was formed out of molten rock. Right there it says was formed out of water by water. So I still say the Big Bang, whether it's a long period of time or short period of time, I still say the Big Bang does not fit biblical teaching. And then 2 Corinthians 4:4. "The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so they cannot see the light of the gospel." So what it says, it's God with little g. What are the gods of this age?
Pride, greed.
Yeah, pride, money. I'd say science. You know, people that want to believe in their own knowledge and ability over what the Bible teaches. So, you know, those are just a couple things to keep in mind as we read these. Paul Davies, a British astrophysicist, he said, "There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming." And then he said, "The laws," meaning the laws of physics, "seem to be the product of exceedingly ingenious design. The universe must have a purpose." Alan Sandage, winner of the Crawford Prize in Astronomy, "I find it quite improbable that such order came out of chaos. There has to be some organizing principle. God to me is a mystery, but is the explanation for the miracle of existence, why there is something instead of nothing. John O'Keefe, an astronomer with NASA. We are, by astronomical standards, a pampered, cosseted, cherished group of creatures. If the universe had not been made with the most exacting precision, we could never come into existence. It is my view that these circumstances indicate the universe was created for man to live in. You know, we live on Earth in what's called the Goldilocks zone. If we're a little closer to Earth or a little closer to the sun, life doesn't exist. If we're a little further away, life doesn't exist. The thing about life is, and it was brought up last week about fine-tuning, and I was not familiar with that terminology, but I'm familiar with the idea behind it. Life is balanced on a razor's edge. And there are so many things in our human body, in our existence, that if it's off just a little bit, life doesn't exist. If your blood acids are just slightly higher in pH or slightly lower in pH, slightly acidic, you don't survive. So there are things about us and the things about the universe that they are balanced on a razor's edge to where if they one way or the other a little bit, and life doesn't exist. And there's not just one thing, there are lots of things that had to be just right for life to exist. You know, Tony Rotham, a physicist, when confronted with the order and beauty of the universe and the strange coincidence of nature, it is very tempting to take the leap of faith from science into religion. I am sure many physicists want to. I only wish they would admit it. Robert Jastrow, a self-proclaimed agnostic. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Frank Tipler, professor of mathematical physics. When I began my career as a cosmologist some 20 years ago, I was a convinced atheist. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that one day I would be writing a book purporting to show that the central claims of Judeo-Christian theology are in fact true, that these claims are straightforward deductions of the laws of physics as we now understand them. I have been forced into these conclusions by the inexorable logic of my own special branch of physics. He is a converted Christian. Anthony Flews, professor of philosophy, a former atheist, an author and a debater. It now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of deoxyribonucleic acid, the chemical inside the nucleus of a cell that carries the genetic instructions for making living organisms, DNA research has provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument for design. I could do hours on DNA. It's amazing. But you know, I'm not saying that occasionally you don't have a Christian who also becomes an atheist as they go through this process. But there are a lot of scientists that start out atheist, and when they peer into the science and into the universe and see what they see, they convert themselves. And there are a number that have gone through this. So that is all I have for today. So if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them. Hopefully the questions are not, I have no idea what you talked about.
Well, you're probably going to get into this, but something that I always question, it's not a question for you necessarily, but something that I always question is, if evolution is real, why have we not continued to evolve? And why does the creature from which we evolved still exist? You would think that you know, if we came from an ape, that there would no longer be apes, and if we've been evolving for over 1 million years, at some point we would no longer be human, but we would be greater than what we are now.
Yeah, I haven't looked, it's along those lines, I haven't looked into it, but there was a particular fish that was thought to have gone extinct like 1 million years ago. And then somebody off in the Aegean Sea found it, still alive. And it looks exactly like the fossils from 4 or 5 million years ago. It has not changed. So either the fossils are not 4 or 5 million years ago, or that fish stopped evolving 4 or 5 million years ago. But the live fish today looks identical to the fossil that they have found. And like I say, I'll do a lesson, but we're going to look at fossil formation, and that, all we know is it takes time and pressure. How much time, how much pressure, that's what we'll look at. I have found evidence of sedimentation rock forming in 150 years. So, here's a rock that's supposed to be millions of years old, and it formed in 150 years, and we know it did because it's at a hot spring, and they put a ladder up against a wall, and the ladder is still there, and the ladder's been there for 150 years, and it's coated in rock. So we know how old that rock is. Just like the volcanic eruptions, we know how old those rocks are, but they age out differently.
Are you familiar with the rate study?
With what?
Rate study.
Maybe.
Chem DeYoung, ICR.
I'd have to look back through some of my stuff.
Basically, what happened is Kevin Young and a bunch of other physicists, biologists, and all that decided to do a replication study of all the radiometric lead isotope studies from the same formations, took them to the same labs, and found two conclusions. Number one, the times are significantly lower than what the original journal article said.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, the level of confidence interval is so big that you might as well have, it doesn't help with the confidence interval is bigger than the amount of the ages.
Yeah.
Too. It's a rate study. You can get it off ICR.org.
So I have a paper here that was published this summer, and it is based on rock aging, and a lot of geologists are challenging this person's, he says the rock is 4 billion years old, and they say, no, it's not, you didn't test it right. So even within the field amongst believers of old Earth, they don't believe each other's findings. So there's a lot of papers, and they're all saying that your methodology was flawed, and a lot of infighting and backstabbing even within the field of people who believe the same thing. I said I don't have anything else, so I heard the second bell, but I'll answer questions if you have them.